Hey everyone, I think we'll get started. We'll, continue to let people in from the waiting room as they get here. But whether you're with us on Zoom or you're with us on Facebook Live, we welcome you to our latest in our series of town halls. Today we're focusing on housing rights, especially for senior citizens. And what are your rights? What are some protections you have? We want to answer questions that you might have and also let you know about resources that are available in the community. So on behalf of ElderNet's Advocacy Committee, I welcome you to the town hall. I'm Anthony Johnson, the Executive Director at ElderNet. And if any of you are unfamiliar with ElderNet, we're a nonprofit based in Bryn Mawr that provides several distinctive services to either help people age safely in their homes or to provide assistance to low-income residents in our community. So just to tell you briefly about the 4 programs that we have, our first is care management. And so you can think of those as the social workers at our agency, and they help you with anything from applying for benefits to they oversee our emergency fund. So if you have a utility shutoff notice or something of that nature, they can, help you with that. We have a limited amount of funding that we can help Lower Merion and Narberth residents with that. And they also do some in-home visiting. So just to be of service to people who can't get physically to our building near Ludington Library, our social workers can go out and provide services in the home. Then we have our volunteer services department, and that's where you think of, those traditional volunteer activities. So someone needs a ride to a doctor's appointment or to a pharmacy. Someone needs odd jobs done around the home, like changing a light bulb or a battery, or if they, just need other types of volunteer assistance, maybe a friendly call or a friendly visit to check in and make sure someone's doing okay. So that's what our volunteer services department does. We also have a fully stocked food pantry on site. It's a choice pantry. So by that, we mean that we don't have pre-filled bags of food that people pick up. We'd like our participants to come in and shop for the groceries that they need and that their household would want. So we have open days on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And we, welcome any questions you might have about the food pantry to see if you're, eligible to use it. Again, what hours of operation are, what sorts of items we have in stock. And then the newest to our mission in terms of programming, we're calling it our advocacy arm. And that's, again, how this webinar series originated with the ideal that sometimes the most vulnerable people in our community don't have voices to speak for themselves, but they still need that help, whether it's from a social worker or an elected official, someone to just stand behind them and say, you know what, we got your back, we understand what you're going through, and this is, the right people we should be getting in front of. This is the right message we should be saying for you that we want people to know about. So again, the Advocacy Committee is very active. We meet monthly. Our Advocacy Committee Chair, Beth Drapkin, is on the call today. She's also an ElderNet board member. She's an interim executive director for ElderNet, so very tied in and connected to what we do here at ElderNet. And she welcomes feedback and input from the community. So, and there's Beth there, just waving. Beth, did you want to say anything or just waving?
I think you're doing a great job. I just want to thank everybody for joining us and welcome our panelists, and look forward to sharing this valuable information with you.
Thank you, Beth. And I'm glad Beth said that, because as you saw, we're recording this, and what we like to do is, with our last town hall, we started something called watch parties, where we actually take this recording to either a senior center or a housing facility for seniors and show this while we have some snacks. But it's just another way to get this important message out to people who might not have been able to attend the recording today. So for the Senior Scams Town Hall, which was January 31st, that next month we took it to Ardmore House, and just had a great time with sandwiches and the residents, and some door prizes and stuff. So just to make it a fun but informative session. for our local seniors and residents. So with that being said, let's see if I have anything else on my notes before we jump into the show here. You can find more information on us at eldernet.org. So with that, today we have a very timely session, with rising rents and mortgage interest rates. You could just tell it's a time when a lot of people are reevaluating their housing situation and what could fit in their household budget and what might not work and how there might need to be some changes, in their near future. So we wanted to have this town hall just as a way, again, to review some of the resources that are available if you or someone you know is at risk of losing housing, or if you just have questions about the eviction process, if you have a fraud tenant landlord relationship that you might want to improve. We have, an expert on here who could give you some resources with that. So first off, we'll start with Commissioner Stevenson. Commissioner Anthony Stevenson brings more than 25 years of experience in public education and community service. He is currently the Director of Human Resources for the Tredyffrin Easttown School District in Wayne. He's also an adjunct professor of education leadership at Temple and at Villanova. Commissioner Stevenson's research interests include issues related to community engagement, leadership, diversity, and equity in public education. Aside from his role as an educator, Dr. Stevenson is very active in various social action projects. He has served on several community and educational boards that include Teachers for a Better Belize, St. Joseph Preparatory School, Greener Partners, Cristo Rey High School Network, and the World Walk Foundation. In 2017, Dr. Stevenson was elected to serve on the Board of Commissioners for Lower Merion Township. As a member of the Lower Merion Board of Commissioners, he serves as the chair of the Affordable Housing Ad Hoc Committee and the American Rescue Plan Engagement Committee. Dr. Stevenson is a graduate of South Carolina State University with his bachelor's. He earned a master's from Indiana University of Pennsylvania and the Lutheran Theological Seminary, Temple University, and the University of Pennsylvania, where he also received his doctorate. His dissertation research at Penn focused on the impact of poverty and social capital in education. A native of Marion, South Carolina, Dr. Stevenson currently resides in Ardmore. And with that, I'll turn it over to Commissioner Stevenson.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson, for the introduction, and thank you for putting this together, ElderNet. Our township is very fortunate to have the partnership with ElderNet over the years, and the work that you talk about you've done and are doing is important. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to talk a little bit about from the lens of the township piece. First of all, we are fortunate in Lower Merion that we have a very strong township in the sense of trying to support the needs of our elderly in relationship to ordinances and regulations. I think that, of all the places I lived, I think that our township does a great job of trying to be responsive. Like anywhere else, there's always need for improvement, but I do think that we have some folks who have been responsible for those needs. I'm going to talk about the needs from a housing concept, and then go from there. I co-chair the Affordable Housing Committee for the township. And while we look at several aspects of affordability, one about helping folks who are trying to move into the township who live on a working wage. We also about people who are trying to maintain and retain existing housing. And the second about the elderly who may fall in all those categories, but who are trying to find housing that meet their needs, that's compliant with their particular needs. So as you know, that the housing access is not only a Lower Merion issue, it is a national issue, and we are not exempt from a place like Lower Merion. So some of the things that we have worked on in the last couple of years to address some of this is one of the things is that we're doing is we're using some of the funds, the American Rescue Plan funding, which one of the projects that we're looking at doing is putting that money, some of that money towards the rebuilding of the Palm. And for those of you who don't know what the Palm is, it is the senior citizen complex that is on Ardmore Avenue. And our goal is to have a plan where that center is expanded, improved, and have more opportunities that are than the ones that already exist to address the supports for activities for our senior citizens. A second piece that we're looking at with also similar funding and a grant from the county is the expansion of the Ardmore House for the Elderly, commonly known as the Ardmore House, which is also Ardmore Avenue. And that is because it is a HUD-funded affordable housing rental property that currently serves 63 qualified senior citizens. Our goal is working to expand that. There's a parking lot there that we are looking to do a feasibility study to expand that up to 40 or 50 additional units. We're working with the Genesis Housing Corporation, which is a nonprofit community housing development organization, to look at they are experts in rehabilitation and new construction housing for elderly. And we're looking at how can we partner with them to make this a successful project to have additional housing pieces there. The third piece that we have been looking at in our affordable housing unit is we're currently looking at changing about, does it make sense to change our ordinance on auxiliary dwellings? And for those who are unfamiliar about what I mean by that, is commonly known as the apartment garages that some people have, or that are set back on top of garages or separated detached garages, to see whether that we can create a attractability in certain parts of the township, whereby having folks who want to create those into small apartments that would be interested to create affordable housing for some of our senior citizens. And the last thing that I will mention that we're working on is through our Ardmore Master Plan, which is a new plan to look at the future of development and housing in Ardmore area. Is part of that plan is how we look at walkability and folks being able to, particularly our senior citizens, being able to navigate their way through the community by looking at places about how we look at our sidewalks, how we look at our curb cuts, how do we look at our traffic signals, our public transportation, including buses, things that are simple as like where benches are, and things that lighting, things that we a lot of times don't think about it in the general scheme, but we're thinking about it for our senior citizens to make sure that they have access to the community, that the business community also that they live in. So those are some highlights. Mr. Johnson, I will stop. I don't even know how long I was talking, so I'll stop and go from there.
Thank you so much. And I see you're working on a lot. You have a full plate there at the township, you know, as one of the newer commissioners. Did you talk to us a little bit more about your work with the Affordable Housing Coalition?
So the Affordable Housing Committee, ad hoc committee, it is, as an overall, has been a good and bad thing. The good thing is that the township is committed. All 14 commissioners are committed to address affordable housing. That's the good news. The bad news is we you know, there's no easy solution. One of the issues is it's not like we are able to acquire housing. The cost of housing in this area is exorbitant. You know, like I remember when I came on the board, there was $1 million set aside for affordable housing for spending. And I thought I was excited. That's a lot of money, $1 million. But when you think about $1 million and trying to purchase homes, we're talking in this area, we're talking 2 on a good day. And that's not including the type of work that you would have to do to rehabilitate it and those kind of things. So that reality kicks in. So when people talk about, well, why can't we just buy houses in the area, that becomes a problem. So those things that I was talking about are things that are trying to come up with ideas that would support it. So for instance, one of the things that we worked on is tangled titles. Something that a lot of people don't think about, but it particularly it would be an interest to our senior citizens, because a lot of times people are in homes that they've been in for decades, that a lot of times were even passed down from one generation to another. And then when it comes to, for instance, our Emily Crane, who works in our township, is in charge of our grants in CBG, the federal grants. So for instance, we had a house that says, hey, we need emergency heater, and we have this funding because for affordable housing, and you were qualified, we could help you out. But we can only help the owner. And if there's a tangled title, we can't help you because you can't prove ownership. So one of the things that we worked on is putting out information about tangled titles. So to help folks be able to address their title piece, so they're able to acquire some of the services if they're eligible. But more importantly, more than just the services, they're able to keep the homes, because a lot of people, and not when I say a lot, in Lower Marion, we looked at our numbers, it's not a lot, but in general, for a lot of times, senior citizens end up losing their homes across the board because they don't have the proper paperwork inside, or when they become deceased, and that the family are not able to have that generational wealth because they lose it because it's not there. So those are things that is. So a lot of times, one of the things that we look at are not just about trying to acquire housing, but helping people have a quality of life around those housing, and addressing some of those issues as we're looking around those pieces.
And I was interested to hear when you were talking about the accessible dwelling units, because that's one topic we've been talking about at our advocacy committee meetings, and how that's a creative way around affordable housing and making more units available. So are you pretty encouraged by this new phenomenon?
I am. We're at the first phase of it now, because the way the ordinances are currently, it doesn't allow for that piece. And so what we're working closely with our assistant director of planning, Charlie Doyle, has been working on looking at ordinances or options that would allow us to do that. What we don't want to do is create something where it is just create a free-for-all with auxiliary houses. We wanted to make sure that it's something for that purpose of affordability, in which, in those kind of things, you have to be careful, and sometimes you have to give or take. So I am encouraged that it would be something that would move forward, but it will take some change in the ordinance, and with that, it takes a little time.
I was reading recently in the Philadelphia Business Journal about the plans in Ardmore to make some changes in the downtown there. And I saw that you had some thoughts about new development, and you said it might not always be the best fit for a community. Can you talk more about that?
Well, for me, I think that, I believe in what is called smart planning. And that is that I think that as a township, we have benefited, and we should continue to benefit from business development. I also think that, I believe that our growth and have the value of homes and the opportunities for people who want to maximize the wealth here. I think that's important, but at the same time, we have to do it thoughtful enough to not lose the characteristics of community, in the community in the sense of and not take away the impact of development on what that community will look like. And that includes in the sense of when we look at businesses, are those businesses still we're going to have enough businesses to cater to the folks who are in the community? So for instance, the IHOP, I mean, I live 4 blocks from the IHOP. I've walked by it. I'm a big walker. I walked by it a million times. I've never been in there, maybe twice in my life. And to me, it's okay if it goes. But a lot of senior citizens have gone to the IHOP over the years because it's something where it was, number one, it was convenient for a lot of them, but number two, it was something that was affordable for them. And those are the kind of things we got to think about, is, that as we look at our business model in the area that's impacted with the changes of apartment buildings and the type of transient people who move in the area. How are we looking at those existing folks or those senior citizens who move here to ensure that they have the type of food, the type of retail stuff, and also the accessibility? And again, like I was saying again, around the walkability, around being able to exit public transit, having also as things as simple as the benches, waiting in the shelters. How are we making sure that we're using those things? Are we keeping the elderly in mind as well? And let me be clear, I am not, under no circumstances am I saying that the township and the folks are not thinking about it, because they are. I just want to make sure that's in the forefront in those discussions as well.
And I'm so glad you said that, because I'm from a part of Montgomery County, the Lansdale area, where we tried to build affordable housing outside of Lansdale and Telford and Souderton, into some areas where there was no SEPTA service. And like you said, when you put low-income residents or seniors out there and they don't have that accessibility to grocery stores and other things that they need in their daily lives, it becomes a real problem.
Yes.
And so I'm afraid for the township that as we build more housing units, that the ones that are designated for affordable housing, that they might be off the beaten path. I know there are some really hilly parts of the township where you might not see SEPTA bus service ever, just because of the topography or conditions. So yeah, I'm glad you said that, and that you're keeping that front of mind for the committees that you work on.
Yep.
Please put affordable housing and other housing, close to transit routes and walkable communities when possible.
Yes.
Yeah. So, and then the last thing I'll ask you is the idea of some definitions you might have around affordable housing. You said sometimes there are, words or concepts that we might not all understand as the same and have different interpretations of.
Well, I think one of the things that we have to look at about how do we define affordability, and that is something that we are as the Board of Commissioners and working with the staff are trying to define. And how do we look at it? Because there are different ways that the people can look at it. First of all, there's the federal guidelines around, the poverty guidelines, how the federal government defines it. Then there is the state guidelines, in which you look at the average in the state, and then even in the township, how we look at it about the average. What is the average household cost of a township? What is the housing market? And we look at it and say, what do we consider a level of affordability? And we would have to keep in mind as we and because we haven't clearly defined it and saying here's our standard that we're going to use, we need to keep in mind that our township has an abundance of variety of wealth, and that that line of that wealth line goes from so we have some people who are at the poverty line, then we have people who have extreme wealth. And so when you put all that in the same pot and come out with an average, either for income or housing, that number is screwed out over compared to other particular areas. So like even if you look at the county, so so I would always have people keep in mind when we said affordable that, our definitions have to, we need to create sub definitions, meaning that, or look at it from a geographical standpoint, because, the average income in Ward 4 of Lower Marion is different from those that would be in other parts. And so maybe when we're looking at our coming up with our final definitions, that we have to like do the subs. But that is something that we're still discussing and versus what we use. And I'm hopeful that we would make it more flexible as we move forward. To adequately reflect some of the population that we need to address.
And that's something we're dealing with here at ElderNet, our social workers, as they try to sign up our participants for different programs. Some programs want to know about the federal poverty guidelines and how people fit into that, while other programs want to know about the HUD poverty guidelines and how people fit into that. So again, just having that basic common, almost a glossary of terms that we can all agree upon as we move forward with these conversations. So
yes.
So thank you. And if I could have you hold for a couple minutes, we'll have our next panelist come in.
Yep, I'm here.
Okay. Great. So Carolyn, I see you're on. Let me just give the crowd a brief introduction. And again, whether you're joining us by Zoom or Facebook Live, welcome to the ElderNet Town Hall on housing rights. We're glad you're able to join us. So Carolyn Steinhofer is the Intake, Enforcement, and Compliance Manager for the Housing Equality Center of Pennsylvania. She has more than 12 years of experience in investigating housing discrimination complaints and in developing fair housing education materials and programs. Carolyn is a HUD certified housing counselor and holds a BS in Human Development and Family Studies from Penn State University. Carolyn, I'll turn it over to you.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for having me. I want to tell you a little bit about your rights as a renter in Pennsylvania. First of all, here's my contact information, my phone number, and my email. Please feel free to reach out to me anytime if you have any questions. We're going to talk briefly today about fair housing law, Pennsylvania landlord-tenant law, and I'll give you some resources of who to call if you have any issues or problems. When we talk about fair housing law, we're talking about the Federal Fair Housing Act. It makes it against the law to discriminate against individuals because of race, color, religion, national origin, sex, which includes sexual orientation and gender identity, disability, and familial status. Familial status means having children under the age of 18, being pregnant, or in the process of securing legal custody of a child. So it's against the law to refuse to rent or sell housing to someone because they're a member of a protected class, or to have different terms and conditions or privileges in the sale or rental of housing because someone is a member of a protected class. It's also unlawful to threaten, coerce, or intimidate someone who's trying to exercise their fair housing rights. Pennsylvania has a State Human Relations Act, which adds 2 additional protected classes in our state: age, which they define as 40 and over, and users, handlers, and trainers of assistance animals for people with disabilities. Lower Merion has a human relations ordinance, which also prohibits discrimination in housing based on roughly the same protected classes as we've already gone over. So just briefly, the Fair Housing Act doesn't guarantee anyone a right to housing they can't afford. Property owners are allowed to set the rents at whatever the market will bear. They can refuse to rent to someone if they have reliable information, but that person has a recent history of violent, disruptive, or destructive behavior. They're allowed to adopt uniform, objective, non-discriminatory criteria to evaluate a prospective tenant or buyer's creditworthiness, their income level, their criminal history. Agents and property owners are not required to rent to users and dealers of illegal drugs. And in Pennsylvania, landlords are allowed to choose whether or not they wish to participate in the Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher Program. So one of the main areas in which people file fair housing complaints is based on disability. Disability is defined briefly by the Fair Housing Act as a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more of a person's major life activities like walking, talking, seeing, hearing, breathing. Under the Fair Housing Act, people with disabilities have the right to request reasonable accommodations and reasonable modifications. So reasonable accommodations are changes in rules, policies, practices, or services that would help a person with a disability to have equal opportunity to enjoy their dwelling. Some of the more common reasonable accommodation requests that we assist people with requesting are having an assistance animal or an emotional support animal despite a no pets policy. Being allowed to have a personal care attendant move in with you without having them to be required to apply and be added to the lease. Another common request is to terminate a lease early without penalty to allow someone to move to a unit that might be more accessible for them or a community that might be more accessible. And another one is providing a reserved parking space for someone who has a mobility impairment or a cardiopulmonary impairment and difficulty walking distances, and they need to have a reserved parking space closest to the entrance to their home. Reasonable modifications are physical changes in the structure of the dwelling to make that dwelling more accessible for a person with a disability. So typically it's the tenant's responsibility to pay for these modifications unless they are living in housing that is covered under what we call Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. But in general, if a tenant is renting from a private landlord, the tenant is responsible to pay if they want to install grab bars or wheelchair ramps or change the visual or tactile alert devices. There are programs that offer financial assistance to individuals who may need to make modifications to their home. So if you would like more information or need assistance with requesting accommodations or modifications, please feel free to reach out for me and I'll give you my contact information again at the end. So we talked a little bit about fair housing law. Let's delve a little bit into Pennsylvania landlord-tenant law. So under Pennsylvania landlord-tenant law, leases are legally binding contracts, whether they are verbal or written. So any changes to the lease term cannot be made, changes can't be made during the lease term. It's a binding contract unless both parties agree to those changes. So if the landlord wants to raise the rent, you can check your lease to find out how much prior notice is given. Is there an agreement as to how these changes are to be made? If it isn't written in the lease, then the landlord is required to give one full rental period before changing the terms of the contract. Sometimes you may find unenforceable lease provisions in your lease. And even if you've signed your lease and agreed to these conditions, these are not enforceable in court. So while you can be held liable for damages to your apartment, you cannot be made responsible for all normal maintenance and repairs or all repairs under a certain dollar amount. Even if you agree to accept your house or apartment as is, you still have rights under the implied warranty of habitability. So that's a state law that says that every rental unit has to be safe, sanitary, and fit for human habitation. You cannot waive your right to represent yourself in a court of law. You can't be made to agree that if you break the lease, the landlord can just barge in and steal all of your possessions and lock you out. And you can't waive your right to a hearing or confession of judgment. Sometimes tenants come across unfair trade practices or instances of landlord fraud, where landlord doesn't even have heat or water service at the rental unit, or you're being asked to pay rent to someone who you don't even think is the landlord, or you're being asked to pay utility services that are in someone else's name. These are issues that need to be addressed by the Bureau of Consumer Protection at the Pennsylvania Attorney General's office, and their phone numbers are given here for you. Every tenant who has a lease in Pennsylvania has a right to privacy. It's called the Covenant of Quiet Enjoyment. It states that the landlord won't unreasonably interfere, so they're not allowed to have excessive intrusions into your rental property. They do have the right to reasonable access. They have the right to enter for maintenance, for inspection, for repair, to show the property to future buyers or tenants. But if they're entering for no reason at all, or they're bothering you at nighttime, they may be violating the lease. Landlords do have the right to enter without prior notice if there's an emergency, like if there's a broken water pipe, or if the smoke detector is activated. They can enter without prior notice, but otherwise they should give you prior notice, and they should give you, they should knock first. They shouldn't just let themselves in. The implied warranty of habitability governs the condition of apartments and dwelling units. You cannot give away this right, even if you've said that you will accept the apartment as is. This is for serious problems. The implied warranty of habitability says that every rental unit has to be safe, sanitary, and fit for human habitation. So we're talking adequate heat, which is typically defined as being able to be maintained at 68 degrees in all habitable rooms and bathrooms. Your unit has to have hot and cold running water, a working electrical system, a working sewage system. It must be free from rodent and insect infestation, and it has to be structurally safe. So doors and windows should secure and lock. The roof shouldn't leak. There should be safe floors, stairs, porches, and handrails. If you have a major habitability issue, a major repair issue, you have to take specific steps to establish and protect your rights. And the first thing that you have to do is notify your landlord in writing about the repairs, and give the landlord a reasonable amount of time to make that repair. You should document the problem with photographs, and keep a copy of all correspondence and communication with the landlord. Pennsylvania landlord tenant law gives tenants some remedy options if they have notified the landlord in writing of serious defects in the unit, have given the landlord a reasonable amount of time to repair them, and the landlord has failed. One is to terminate the lease and move out. Another is to withhold all or a portion of the rent, putting it in a separate checking account. Another option is called repair and deduct, where you would get estimates. Say if you have a sink that's clogged, you would get estimates from plumbers. Tell the landlord, hey, it's going to cost $300 to fix the sink. I'm going to pay the plumber $300, and then I'm going to deduct that $300 from next month's rent. The fourth option of filing a legal action is rarely ever used. Proper legal advice is really invaluable in these cases. So you need to be fully prepared before undertaking one of these remedies. Pennsylvania landlord tenant law prohibits landlords from evicting someone because they've raised a habitability issue. But if you've broken the lease, or you've improperly withheld rent for a cosmetic issue or just an improper issue, you could still be evicted. So you want to be prepared. Think of what a judge is going to want to see if this goes to court. And you're probably going to want to consult with someone at Legal Aid or the Senior Law Center. And I'll give you those contacts in a couple minutes. Pennsylvania does not have a rent control law. So landlords are allowed to raise the rent as much as they want, but they have to follow the proper notice that they're supposed to give in that contract that they've agreed to. So they're not allowed to raise the rent in the middle of the lease term unless you agree to that rent increase. To avoid eviction, it's really important that you pay the full amount of rent on time. But I want to throw out that many seniors receive Social Security income or Social Security disability income. And the timing of when you receive that check is dependent on a number of factors. But you might receive your check on the second Tuesday of the month, or the third Thursday, or the fourth Friday. And that might get hard for some people to be able to pay the rent on time in full every month. And that may be a reasonable accommodation that we can assist you with. And we can help you request to pay your rent late without a late fee, or to just have your due date moved to correspond with when you receive your SSI or SSDI checks. In any event, make sure that you're keeping copies of all rental payments to your landlord. If you pay by a canceled check, that serves as proof of payment. If you're paying by cash or money order, it is essential that you get a written receipt. Self-help evictions are unlawful. So landlords, even if you fall behind in rent, landlords are not allowed to lock you out, turn off your utilities. They're not allowed to block your access to your rental unit. Only a constable with an order of possession from the court can legally lock a tenant out of a rental unit. If that ever happens, the tenant should call the police, be able to show, hopefully, if you don't have a copy of your lease available, a piece of mail that shows your address as that address. The police should ask the landlord to present an order of possession. If they cannot present it, the police should allow you to regain possession of your rental unit immediately. You should ask for a police report to be filed, ask to speak to a sergeant or supervisor if necessary. If a landlord wants you to move out, they should give you what's called a notice to quit. So the notice to quit is typically given in writing and posted on your door. However, the terms that the landlord is required to give you for the notice to quit is determined by what is in the contract or the lease. So the lease can require longer or shorter notices, or even no notice at all. If the lease doesn't specify how this notice to quit is to be given or how much time is to be given, then we fall back on Pennsylvania landlord-tenant law, which requires a minimum of a 10-day notice for non-payment of rent, 15 days notice for any other reason on month-to-month leases, and 30 days notice for leases of a year or more. So if the landlord gives you a notice to quit and says, I want you out by the end of the month, and you're not out by the end of the month, they can't just lock you out. They can't engage in that self-help eviction. They have to go to the district magistrate court and file a landlord-tenant complaint. This is an opportunity for you to appear, to give your testimony, bring any witnesses that you might have. If you're late or you don't show up, a judgment might be entered against you. If the landlord fails to show up, then the tenant should ask for the case to be dismissed. If the landlord didn't give proper notice to quit, you should bring that up in court, and the judge will be required to have the landlord restart that entire eviction process. It won't stop you from being evicted eventually, but it will buy the tenant more time. Either at that hearing or within the next 3 days, the district magistrate will issue a notice of judgment. One of the judgments might say possession granted if money judgment not satisfied. We call that a pay and stay. That means if you can pay the money that is owed by the deadline, that you can stay in that unit. So there's two parts to the judge's decision, the possession part and the money judgment part. If you want to appeal either one of them, you have to go to the prothonotari's office at the Court of Common Pleas. You'll want to consult with an attorney. It's a more complicated process when you go to the Court of Common Pleas. Some quick resources for you. Legal Aid of Southeastern Pennsylvania can help you if you are low income. And the Senior Law Center will provide legal advice for individuals who are 60 and up in Pennsylvania. If you're facing utility shutoffs, you can call the Pennsylvania Utility Law Project for advice on your legal rights. We produce this Know Your Rights as a Renter in Pennsylvania manual. I'd be happy to send you printed copies if you'd like printed copies. We have a website, renters.equalhousing.org. It has the contents of our renter's manual. We provide you with sample letters to your landlord. You can request assistance with a reasonable accommodation or modification request. We have a fair housing guide to reasonable accommodations and modifications with sample letters to landlords. It's very useful. If you ever believe you've experienced housing discrimination, please contact us at the Housing Equality Center. We can discuss with you the particulars of your case. We may be able to do an investigation to corroborate your allegations. There are statutes of limitations. You have to file within 1 year with HUD. So we want to be mindful of the time that's passing. This is our main website, equalhousing.org, where you can get a lot more information. This is just a little bit about our organization. We're the oldest fair housing council in the country. We serve Southeastern Pennsylvania. And finally, again, my contact information for you if you want to reach out to me for any assistance with a landlord-tenant issue or a fair housing issue.
Carolyn, thank you so much. So many good resources.
You're
It's
welcome.
amazing that you were able to go through them so quickly, but there's something for everyone there, I think. And I just want to say a heartfelt thank you too on behalf of the social workers who work here. I know, one of my social workers is currently dealing with an eviction, in Ardmore, where there might be some mental health issues on the part of the tenant. And she reached out to you, and the quickness with which you responded and just the level of help that you gave her on so many levels. It was remarkable to see, and she was so thankful for that. So thank you again for what you do, because it is a very scary time for our participants if they're receiving an eviction notice and they don't know where to go or what to do. And our social workers a lot of times are like, well, we'll find out what resources are available. And you were right on time, I tell you that.
Oh, thank you. Well, we owe our consumers everything. We owe it to them to do everything we can to help them obtain and maintain stable housing. And so that means helping with reasonable accommodations and modifications to make their homes more accessible so they can stay in their homes longer, or getting permission to have a live-in aide come and stay with them, or helping them to avoid eviction. So we are here to help in any way that we can.
Thank you so much. And you've been doing these trainings for years now, after reading your bio. And is there something that still surprises you that the people who are sitting in on the training might not know about?
Yeah, so the landlord is required to, once you move out, you've given proper notice that you're moving out, and you've returned the keys, and you've cleaned the unit, and you don't owe any rent. Once you've moved out, the landlord has 30 days to either return your security deposit in full, or to give you a written list of damages and the remainder of the deposit if there's any left. And if they fail to do that within 30 days, on the 31st day, the tenant can go to the district magistrate court and sue the landlord for double the amount of the security deposit plus court costs and interest, if any.
So double on the 31st day.
Mhm.
You can see that's pretty remarkable. I didn't know that. So thank you for sharing that with us. And then the other question that came up during your presentation, I was surprised by. So there are protections for the LGBTQ community,
Yes,
even though it's not a protected class in the state?
so under the category, there was a Supreme Court decision, Bostock versus Clayton County, which established that prohibitions against discrimination based on sex or gender in the workplace apply to individuals who are being discriminated against because of their sexual orientation or their gender identity. So due to that Supreme Court decision, there was an executive order issued in 2021 by President Biden, which directed the heads of all federal agencies to begin implementing existing statutes like the Federal Fair Housing Amendments Act to include sexual orientation and gender identity. So individuals, members of the LGBTQ plus community, if they believe that they've experienced discrimination because they're a member of the LGBTQ community, have formal standing to file formal complaints of housing discrimination. And I encourage anyone who believes they've been discriminated against or treated unfairly to contact us, that we can assist them.
Thank you for that. That's important information right there. So thank you for that. So Commissioner Stevenson, as we're wrapping up and giving time for the audience to send any questions in, I was wondering, how do you see residents best engaging in the I want to say fight for affordable housing in the township, but in the as we try to make progress with getting affordable housing? Should they join a commission? Should they, join a committee, or what should they do?
I think that they should continue to advocate through the various organizations, reaching out to their local commissioners, but not only that, but also to their state reps as well, because one of the things that state and federal funding is an important piece that's going to be important as well to this. Using the resources of their advocacy groups would be helpful, yes.
And let's see, I don't see any questions. So I do want to make sure you both have a chance to say a website or email, for anyone watching on Facebook Live or on the Zoom, how to get in touch with you or find out more about your programs and services.
So everybody, lauramarion.org, you can reach me through there. Glad to speak to anyone and talk to anyone about the work we're doing.
And Carolyn, a website or best way to get a hold of you?
Yes, so our website is equalhousing.org. We have two other websites, renters.equalhousing.org and landlords.equalhousing.org. So feel free to reach out to us anytime. I'm always happy to hear from people and happy to do anything I can to help.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you both so much. Commissioner Stevenson, Carolyn, it's been an informative hour. I think everyone's walking away with something new that they didn't know before, which is always the goal of these town halls. So again, on behalf of ElderNet's Advocacy Committee, I thank everyone for joining us today. This session will be recorded and available on our website soon, so keep a lookout for that. And again, thank you so much, and we'll be in touch with our next town hall. Take care, everyone.
Thank you for the invite. Take care.
Thank you. Have a good day.